Have you ever had someone look at you like you don't exist? Not just ignore you, actually look through you, as if you're invisible, irrelevant, disposable? That's what happened to me in a conference room full of 40 people. And what came next exposed a truth most people never learn. The ones who perform power the loudest are usually the ones who understand it the least. I couldn't believe what I was hearing when the new CEO refused to shake my hand and announced I'd be gone, effective immediately. 12 years of dedication, of being the person who made impossible things possible, reduced to nothing in front of colleagues who suddenly became strangers. I felt humiliated, shamed, backstabbed by an entire system that chose silence over solidarity. But here's the secret. Nobody tells you about betrayal. Sometimes the greatest weapon isn't fighting back with emotion. It's understanding the machinery better than the people who think they control it. While Marcus Hale was performing his power play, publicly mocking my worth and cheating every standard of decency leadership demands, I was doing something far more dangerous. I was remembering documents he'd never read, clauses he didn't know existed, authority delegated years before he ever walked through those doors. The shocking truth wasn't that he fired me. The shocking truth was that he had no idea what I could actually do. What happened next wasn't revenge, though that's what people wanted to call it. It wasn't even about justice in the way you might think. It was about revealing a fundamental paradox. The person everyone assumed had no power was the only one in that building who understood where real power actually lived. Not in confidence or cruelty or corner offices, but in structure, in documentation, in the quiet authority of signatures most people forget to check. Marcus thought he'd eliminated a problem. What he'd actually done was activate a system he didn't know he was standing inside. And that system? It was about to show him the difference between performing leadership and understanding how institutions actually work. By the time the dust settled, $2.7 billion in capital had been frozen, emergency board meetings had been called, and the man who refused my handshake was escorted out by security, all within 6 business days. Then came the offer I never expected. Return to the company with triple the salary, a C-suite title, and all the validation I might have craved 2 weeks earlier. But here's what I learned through all of this. What infidelity and betrayal and public humiliation taught me about dignity and self-worth. Real power isn't about getting the people who wronged you to finally see your value. It's about knowing your value so deeply that their recognition becomes irrelevant. This isn't a story about getting even. It's a story about what happens when someone mistakes your silence for weakness, your competence for compliance, your invisibility for insignificance. It's about the moment you realize that respect isn't something you beg for. It's something you enforce through boundaries they didn't know existed. And it's about the choice between accepting the consolation prize of being brought back or walking away, knowing that the consequence you created wasn't negotiable, wasn't transactional, and definitely wasn't finished just because they finally understood what they'd lost. What you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about power, revenge, and justice in the workplace. Because the truth that Marcus Hale learned too late, is that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. Not because they're planning something loud, but because they're the only one who actually read the manual. And when that manual includes authority clauses, compliance recordings, and procedural triggers that nobody remembered to revoke, well, then it's not about what you can threaten. It's about what you can execute. And execution, unlike performance, doesn't need an audience. It just needs to be done. I'll never forget the exact moment my dignity was stripped away in front of 40 people. Marcus Hale, the new CEO everyone whispered about for weeks, finally walked into that conference room like he owned not just the company, but our souls. I'd worked at Meridian Capital for 12 years, 12 years of late nights, of being the one they called when systems collapsed, of holding together deals that others couldn't even understand. So when he reached my spot at that long mahogany table, I did what any professional would do. I stood up, smiled, and extended my hand. What happened next still makes my stomach turn. He looked at my hand like it was contaminated. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement in those cold gray eyes. Just a deliberate, calculated glance down at my outstretched palm, then back to my face. "I don't shake hands with people who won't be here much longer," he said, voice sharp enough to cut glass, loud enough for everyone to hear. The room went silent. That awful, suffocating kind of silence where you can hear your own heartbeat pounding in your ears. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But there it was. Public humiliation wrapped in a corporate smile. Someone coughed nervously. Others looked down at their laptops, suddenly fascinated by their screens, and I realized something devastating. They weren't shocked. They were relieved it wasn't them. Marcus kept walking. Didn't even break stride. Like swatting away my existence cost him nothing. That's when the betrayal really hit me. Not from him, but from the 40 faces that refused to meet my eyes. These were people I'd mentored, covered for, celebrated with at company dinners. Now, silence, compliance, cowardice. The HR director, Patricia something or other, was already standing near the door with a manila folder. And I just knew. My name was typed on whatever document she clutched like a shield. This wasn't spontaneous. This was theater. Backstab doesn't even cover it when the knife's been polished and the stage set before you even walk in. Effective immediately, we're making changes to align with our new culture, Marcus announced, circling back to the head of the table like a predator claiming territory. His tone was casual, almost bored, as if dismissing someone's entire career was just another agenda item between lunch and the quarterly review. Annabelle Parker, your position has been eliminated. Please see HR for your exit process. That's it. No explanation, no reasoning, no chance to defend myself or even ask why. Just corporate efficiency disguising cruelty as progress, and 40 people nodding along like this was normal. I felt shamed, humiliated, and utterly invisible, but something strange happened in that moment. Instead of crumbling, instead of crying or shouting, I felt something else click into place. I didn't move, didn't react, didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I pulled out my phone, opened the voice memo app, and looked directly at him. "Marcus, could you please repeat the exact language you just used to terminate my employment? And the timestamp. I'd like it documented precisely." The room shifted. His eyebrow twitched. Patricia's folder dipped slightly. See? Everyone expected tears. Maybe an outburst. Perhaps some desperate plea about dignity and self-worth. But I wasn't giving him any of that. I was doing something far more dangerous. I was paying attention to details he didn't think mattered. "Are you serious right now?" Marcus asked. And for the first time, I heard something other than confidence in his voice. Annoyance, maybe. Or the tiniest seed of uncertainty. "Completely serious," I replied, my voice steady as stone. "If my career at Meridian Capital is ending today, I want the record to be crystal clear. For documentation purposes." He glanced at Patricia, who shrugged slightly. A gesture that told me everything. They'd planned the execution, but not the aftermath. They never considered I might not just walk away quietly. And in that micro moment of hesitation, in that flicker of confusion across Marcus Hale's face, I saw something that would change everything. The truth was, this meeting wasn't the end. It was barely even the beginning. Marcus didn't repeat the exact words. Of course he didn't. Instead, he waved his hand dismissively and said, "Patricia will provide you with all the documentation you need. This conversation is over." But what he didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that the conversation had already been recorded. Every company meeting in that building was automatically captured by our compliance system. A policy I'd helped implement 4 years ago when we expanded into regulated markets. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very structure I'd built to protect the company was now going to protect me. Or rather, it was going to expose exactly what kind of leader Marcus Hale really was. I gathered my phone, my notebook, and what remained of my composure, and walked toward the door where Patricia stood. The family drama of it all. Because that's what corporate politics really is, isn't it? Just family dysfunction in expensive suits, played out in the silent exchanges around that table. Former allies suddenly studying their coffee cups. People I'd trained refusing to make eye contact. This wasn't just about losing a job. This was about watching an entire ecosystem choose survival over solidarity. Karma, I thought, has a funny way of keeping score, and I was about to become the accountant. Patricia's office was sterile and cold, just like the process she walked me through. Sign here, here, and initial here, she droned, sliding papers across her desk like a dealer at a casino. Severance package, non-compete clause, confidentiality agreement, standard corporate payback for years of service, a few months' salary, and a legal gag order. You understand that discussing the circumstances of your departure could result in forfeiture of your severance, correct? She asked, her tone suggesting this was routine. I nodded, signed everything, and said nothing. Because here's what I understood that she didn't. Silence can be strategic. Revenge doesn't always announce itself. As I walked out of that building for what everyone assumed was the last time, carrying a pathetic cardboard box with my desk plant and a few personal items, I felt the weight of injustice pressing down on my shoulders. 12 years. 12 years of being the person who made impossible things possible, who understood the systems nobody else bothered to learn, who held relationships with investors that predated Marcus Hale's entire career. And it ended with a refused handshake and a manila folder. The security guard, Miguel, at least had the decency to look uncomfortable as he escorted me out. "Sorry, Ms. Parker," he whispered. "Orders." I smiled at him. Actually smiled. Because he was just doing his job. And besides, I wasn't angry anymore. I was calculating. See, when you work in private equity infrastructure for over a decade, you don't just process deals. You understand the architecture of power. You know where the load-bearing walls are. You know which signatures actually matter and which ones are just theater. And as I drove home that afternoon, hands steady on the wheel, mind racing through file directories and archived email chains, I started to remember something. Something about a transition document from 3 years ago, when our previous managing director retired. Something about delegated authorities that were never formally revoked. Something that Marcus Hale, in his arrogant rush to remake the company in his image, probably never even bothered to review. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the humiliation had transformed into something else entirely. Clarity. Purpose. The kind of cold, focused energy that comes when you realize you're not the victim in this story. You're the plot twist nobody saw coming. I didn't cry. Didn't call friends to vent. Didn't post anything on social media about vengeance or justice. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea, opened my laptop, and started searching through backed-up files I'd kept from years of meticulous record-keeping. Because if there's one thing 12 years teaches you, it's this. The real power in any organization isn't who talks the loudest, it's who controls the signatures. That night, while Marcus Hale was probably celebrating his efficient first day with expensive whiskey and self-congratulation, I was sitting at my Kit Parker table surrounded by 3 years of archived documents. My cat, Pepper, watched me from the windowsill with that knowing look cats have, like she understood I was hunting something, even if she didn't know what. I'd always been the person who kept copies, who documented everything, who treated every email and every signed memo like it might matter someday. My ex-husband used to mock me for it, called it paranoid. Turns out it wasn't paranoia. It was preparation for a moment exactly like this. The file I was looking for had a boring name. Authority Delegation Matrix, Executive Transition 2022. It was buried in a subfolder inside another subfolder, the kind of document that gets created during corporate restructuring and then forgotten the moment everyone moves on to the next crisis. But I remembered it. I remembered it because I'd been the one who drafted it, who'd sat in those endless meetings with legal counsel and the outgoing managing director, Daniel Reeves. Daniel had been old school, meticulous, careful, someone who understood that real power isn't about swagger and speeches. It's about knowing where the wiring runs behind the walls. As I opened the PDF, my heart started beating faster. There it was, on page 17, a clause about capital commitment authority. Specifically, authority to approve or, and this was the critical part, to withdraw commitments to portfolio investments under specific circumstances. The language was dense, full of legal terminology about fiduciary duty and material breach of conduct standards. But the core was simple. Certain senior officers retained the power to pull funding, if leadership behavior created reputational or operational risk. And guess whose name was listed as one of 3 authorized signatories? Mine, Annabelle Parker. Still active, still valid, never formally rescinded. I sat back, tea forgotten, staring at that document like I'd just discovered a map to buried treasure. The shocking truth was right there in black and white. Marcus could fire me, could humiliate me in front of 40 people, could pretend I didn't exist, but he couldn't erase my signature from a legal document that predated his entire tenure. This wasn't about emotion anymore. This wasn't about hurt feelings or wounded pride. This was about structure, about systems, about the kind of authority that doesn't need to perform, because it's already written into the foundation. Dignity, I realized, isn't just how people treat you. It's what you're able to enforce when they don't. But I needed to be smart about this. Impulsive revenge is satisfying for about 10 seconds. Then it backfires and makes you look unhinged. No, what I needed was documentation, verification, and a clear path that couldn't be argued away with charm or intimidation. So I did 3 things. First, I requested a copy of the recorded meeting from that morning through the company's compliance portal, a request I had every legal right to make as a former employee within the severance period. Second, I pulled up the current portfolio summary, specifically the investments where capital was still being deployed in tranches. And third, I called my former colleague, Jennifer Wu, who now worked in legal compliance. Annabelle, oh my God, I heard what happened. That was so messed up, Jennifer said, her voice dropping to a whisper like she was afraid someone might overhear. Jen, I need you to answer one question, and I need you to be honest with me, I said, keeping my tone neutral, professional. The authority delegation document from the 2022 transition. Is it still active in the system, or was it superseded when Marcus came in? There was a pause. The sound of typing, then, still active. Actually, it looks like nobody's touched that file since it was uploaded. Why? I smiled, even though she couldn't see me. Just confirming something from my records. Thanks, Jen. The pieces were falling into place, and somewhere across town, Marcus Hale had absolutely no idea what was coming. The next morning, I received the meeting recording through the compliance portal, delivered automatically, no questions asked, just like the system was designed to do. I downloaded it immediately, backed it up in 3 different places, and then I did something that might seem small, but felt monumental. I listened to it, not just once, but 4 times. Each time Marcus's words became clearer, sharper, more damning. I don't shake hands with people who won't be here much longer. The contempt in his voice wasn't accidental. It was intentional, performative cruelty, designed to establish dominance. And the part about new culture and effective immediately, that wasn't leadership. That was a power play disguised as efficiency. And it was all right there, time-stamped and undeniable. But the recording was only half of what I needed. The real weapon, the thing that would make this justice instead of just noise, was understanding exactly which portfolio investments were vulnerable. I pulled up my personal archives and cross-referenced them with the public filings I could still access. Meridian Capital had just closed a massive growth equity deal 6 weeks ago, $1.8 billion committed to a tech infrastructure rollout across emerging markets. The capital was being released in stages, and the next tranche, $700 million, was scheduled to deploy in 72 hours. Add that to the existing commitments in 2 other deals, and we were looking at roughly $2.7 billion in active uncommitted capital that was still technically under delegated authority. Here's where it gets interesting. The authority delegation document didn't just give me the power to approve capital deployment. It gave me the power to freeze or withdraw it under a specific set of conditions. And those conditions? Material breach of fiduciary conduct standards, or leadership behavior creating reputational risk to the fund or its limited partners. Marcus firing me wasn't the trigger, but Marcus publicly humiliating a senior officer, creating a hostile environment documented on a compliance recording, and doing so without following proper termination protocols. That checked every single box. The betrayal he'd committed wasn't just personal, it was procedural. And in private equity, procedure is everything. I spent the entire day mapping out the chain of consequences. If I invoked the delegation clause and froze the capital deployment, It would trigger immediate alerts to the fund's legal team, the limited partners, and the board of directors. Those weren't people Marcus could charm or intimidate. They were institutional investors who cared about one thing: risk management. A new CEO creating enough chaos in his first week to activate emergency authority protocols? That's not a management-style difference. That's a red flag the size of a football field. And the best part, the part that made me feel something close to vindication, was that this wasn't revenge. This was process. This was me exercising authority that I'd always had, that I'd earned, that nobody had bothered to revoke because they didn't even remember it existed. But I still had a choice to make. I could let it go, take my severance, find another job, and move on with my life, like a reasonable person. Or I could do what every cell in my body was screaming at me to do. Show Marcus Hale that the power he thought he had was nothing compared to the power he didn't know existed. The decision should have been hard. It should have required soul-searching and moral deliberation. But here's the truth. It wasn't hard at all, because this wasn't about getting even. This was about reclaiming something he'd tried to take from me. My self-worth, my dignity, the idea that I mattered. He'd treated me like I was disposable, like I was nothing, and I was about to prove that nothing can still have teeth. I opened my laptop, pulled up the secure portal that still, miraculously, beautifully, recognized my credentials, and began drafting the formal notice. My hands didn't shake. My breath was steady. I felt calm in a way I hadn't felt since the moment Marcus refused my handshake. Because here's what he didn't understand about people like me. We don't need to be loud to be dangerous. We don't need to threaten or bluster. We just need to know where the buttons are. And I was about to push the one that would make his entire world collapse. The only question left was timing. And I'd already decided that, too. I've learned something about documentation over the years. It's not just evidence, it's armor. And right now, I had both the recording and the delegation document sitting side by side on my screen, like two puzzle pieces that fit together so perfectly, it almost felt like fate. The recording gave me proof of conduct. The delegation document gave me authority. Together, they created something Marcus Hale couldn't argue his way out of, couldn't spin with corporate jargon, couldn't dismiss as a misunderstanding. This wasn't subjective. This wasn't he said, she said. This was time-stamped, legally binding, undeniable reality. And the beauty of it, the thing that made me smile for the first time in 48 hours, was that he'd done this to himself. I listened to the recording one more time, transcribing the key phrases word for word. I don't shake hands with people who won't be here much longer. Effective immediately. New culture. Each sentence was a nail in a coffin he'd built without even realizing it. Because here's what Marcus didn't understand about companies like Meridian Capital. They're built on trust, reputation, and the perception of stability. Limited partners don't invest billions of dollars with funds led by people who publicly humiliate employees. They don't tolerate leaders who create hostile environments documented on compliance systems. The infidelity here wasn't romantic. It was professional. He'd cheated the standards, lied about the culture he claimed to be building, and now he was about to face the karma that comes when systems catch up with behavior. I drafted the formal notification carefully, clinically, like a surgeon making an incision. No emotion, no accusations, just facts, clauses, and references to specific sections of the authority delegation document. Pursuant to Section 4, 2B of the Executive Authority Delegation Matrix dated March 2022, I am hereby invoking my authority to freeze capital deployment on the following investments pending board review of material conduct concerns. I listed the 3 portfolio companies, the dollar amounts, and the deployment dates. Then I attached 2 things: a copy of the delegation document with my signature authority highlighted, and a link to the compliance recording with relevant timestamps noted. It was clinical. Professional. Utterly devastating. But before I hit send, I did something that might seem paranoid but felt absolutely necessary. I copied everything to my personal lawyer, to a secure cloud backup, and to a trusted former colleague who'd left Meridian 2 years ago and now worked at a competing firm. Not because I thought anyone would try to destroy evidence, though in corporate warfare, stranger things have happened, but because I needed witnesses. I needed people who could verify that what I was about to do wasn't impulsive, wasn't emotional, wasn't revenge disguised as process. It was legitimate exercise of authority in response to documented misconduct. The difference between those two things is everything. One makes you look vindictive, the other makes you look competent. And competence in this world is the ultimate power. I hovered over the send button for exactly 10 seconds. 10 seconds to consider the consequences, the fallout, the reality that once I did this, there was no taking it back. Marcus would know who'd done it. The board would launch an investigation. The limited partners would demand explanations. The entire ecosystem of Meridian Capital would shift on its axis, and I would be the earthquake. But here's what I kept coming back to. He'd fired me, effective immediately, without hesitation, without remorse, without even the basic courtesy of a private conversation. He'd humiliated me in front of 40 people and expected me to just disappear quietly. Well, I was about to show him what happens when you underestimate someone who actually understands how the machinery works. I clicked send. The email went out at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night, late enough that it would hit inboxes during off hours, early enough that by Friday morning, the entire executive team would be scrambling. The automated system sent confirmation receipts immediately. Legal department, board secretary, limited partner liaison, compliance officer. Every single person who mattered in the Meridian Capital hierarchy now had proof that their new CEO had created enough chaos in his first week to trigger emergency authority protocols. And the best part? I hadn't threatened anyone, hadn't made accusations, hadn't even mentioned Marcus by name in the notification. I'd just followed procedure. Systems don't argue, they execute. And I'd just executed the opening move in a game Marcus didn't even know he was playing. Friday morning arrived like any other morning, coffee brewing, sunlight streaming through my Kit Parker window, Pepper stretching on the couch. Except everything had changed. I didn't check my email obsessively, didn't pace around my apartment waiting for responses. I just sat there, calm, centered, knowing that across town, Meridian Capital was waking up to a crisis they couldn't ignore. See, that's the thing about well-designed systems. Once you activate them, they move forward with or without your participation. I'd lit the fuse. Now I just had to wait for the explosion. And trust me, I didn't have to wait long. My phone started buzzing around 8:15 a.m. First, a text from Jennifer in legal compliance. Annabelle, what did you do? Then an email from the board secretary requesting my availability for an urgent call. Then another text from a former colleague. The entire executive floor is in lockdown meetings. Rumor is you froze 2.7B in deployments. Is that true? I didn't respond to any of them. Radio silence is its own kind of power. Especially when people are desperate for explanations you're under no obligation to provide. Marcus had taught me that lesson himself. When you have authority, you don't need to explain. You just act. And then you let everyone else scramble to figure out what happened. By 10 a.m., my lawyer called. Annabelle, I've been contacted by Meridian's general counsel. They want to schedule a mediation to discuss the situation constructively. I could hear the skepticism in his voice, the unspoken question. What exactly had I done that scared them this badly? What did you tell them? I asked, sipping my coffee like this was the most normal Friday in the world. I told them you'd exercised legitimate authority under existing delegation protocols, and that any conversation would require full board participation, not just executive management. He paused. Annabelle, they're panicking. Whatever you did, it worked. Worked didn't even begin to cover it. What I'd done was activate the one thing Marcus couldn't control. Institutional accountability. The thing about private equity is that it runs on confidence. Limited partners, the pension funds, endowments, sovereign wealth funds that invest billions. They need to believe their money is being managed by stable, competent, trustworthy people. When a new CEO triggers emergency protocols in his first week because of documented misconduct, that confidence evaporates instantly, and without confidence, capital freezes. Deals stall, reputations crumble, I hadn't just pulled funding from 3 portfolio companies. I'd pulled the pin on Marcus Hale's credibility grenade. The shocking part wasn't that I had this power. The shocking part was that nobody, including Marcus, had bothered to check if I still had it. Around 2 p.m., I finally allowed myself to check the compliance portal one more time. There were 14 new entries logged since midnight. Emergency board meeting scheduled, limited partner notification sent, external legal counsel engaged, interim authority review initiated, CEO conduct investigation opened. 14 dominoes, all falling in sequence, all because I'd pushed the first one. And the most beautiful part? I hadn't broken a single rule. I hadn't violated my severance agreement, hadn't disclosed confidential information, hadn't done anything remotely illegal or unethical. I'd simply used the authority I'd always had, in response to behavior that was documented and undeniable. Justice, real justice, doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be precise. As the sun set that Friday evening, I poured myself a glass of wine, something I almost never do, and allowed myself one moment of satisfaction. Not celebration, not gloating. Just quiet acknowledgement that I'd reclaimed something Marcus tried to take. My agency, my self-worth, my proof that dignity isn't given by people who have titles. It's claimed by people who understand how power actually works. Marcus had performed authority in that conference room, refused my handshake like some kind of corporate alpha move. But performance isn't structure. Confidence isn't competence. And somewhere in a corner office across town, he was beginning to understand the difference. The real question now wasn't what I'd done. It was what he'd do next, and whether he'd even have the chance to decide. Monday morning hit Meridian Capital like a freight train nobody saw coming. I wasn't there to witness it firsthand, but I didn't need to be. My network of former colleagues kept me updated with a steady stream of messages that painted a picture more satisfying than anything I could have imagined. The finance team arrived to find their systems flagged with hold orders they couldn't override. Legal was fielding calls from limited partners demanding explanations. And Marcus? Marcus was apparently locked in back-to-back crisis meetings, his carefully constructed new culture crumbling around him faster than he could spin narratives to save it. The building wasn't just in chaos, it was in survival mode. By noon, the story had leaked beyond Meridian's walls. Someone, I never found out who, tipped off a financial reporter about internal governance issues at one of the city's most prominent private equity firms. The article didn't name names, didn't have all the details, but it had enough. Sources indicate that emergency authority protocols were activated following alleged misconduct by recently appointed leadership. In this industry, that's blood in the water. Competitors started circling. Potential deals got put on hold. Portfolio companies began making nervous calls. The absence of $2.7 billion wasn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It was a signal to the entire market that something was fundamentally broken. And markets, like sharks, can smell broken from miles away. What Marcus didn't understand, what people like him never understand, is that authority isn't about how loud you are or how confidently you walk into a room. It's about what happens when you're not in the room. And right now, in rooms all across the financial district, people were having conversations about him without him. Board members questioning the vetting process. Limited partners reviewing their partnership agreements. Lawyers analyzing exposure and liability. He'd gone from being the celebrated new CEO, the transformation leader who was going to modernize Meridian Capital, to being a risk factor that needed to be contained. The betrayal he'd committed against me had boomeranged into a betrayal of every stakeholder who'd trusted him. Jennifer sent me a text around 3 p.m. that made me actually laugh out loud. He's asking people if they know how to reach you. He wants to clear up any misunderstandings. Annabelle. He looks terrified. Misunderstandings. As if publicly humiliating someone, firing them without cause, and creating a documented hostile environment could be chalked up to a simple miscommunication. The audacity was almost impressive. Almost. But more than that, his desperation revealed something crucial. He'd finally figured out that I wasn't some disgruntled ex-employee making noise. I was someone who'd outmaneuvered him using the very systems he'd been too arrogant to study, and now he wanted to negotiate. Now he wanted to talk. Now suddenly, my handshake would have been worth something. But here's the thing about revenge. No, not revenge. Let's call it what it really was. Reclaiming power. It's not about accepting apologies or finding middle ground. It's about letting consequences unfold exactly as they should. Marcus had made a choice in that conference room. He'd chosen cruelty over courtesy, performance over professionalism, dominance over decency. And choices, real choices, come with outcomes you don't get to negotiate away when they become inconvenient. I could have answered his messages, could have taken his calls, could have played the game of corporate diplomacy. But I didn't build this situation to create a conversation. I built it to create accountability. And accountability, unlike authority, can't be performed. It has to be earned through consequence. As Monday evening settled in, I received an email I'd been waiting for. Formal notice that the board of directors had scheduled an emergency session for Wednesday morning to review recent governance matters and leadership conduct concerns. They were moving faster than I'd anticipated, which told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a PR problem they could manage quietly. This was an existential threat to the fund's reputation, and they knew it. Marcus Hale had become a liability in less than a week, and now the same people who'd hired him were going to decide whether he was worth the risk. I closed my laptop, finished my dinner, and went to bed earlier than usual. Because unlike Marcus, who was probably pacing his office trying to figure out how to save his career, I already knew how this story ended. I'd written it myself. Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I'd been ignoring most calls for days, but something told me to pick up. And there he was, Marcus Hale himself, his voice attempting warmth like someone trying on a costume that didn't quite fit. "Annabelle, I'm glad I finally reached you. I think we got off on the wrong foot, and I'd like to discuss how we can resolve the situation in a way that benefits everyone. Benefits everyone." The phrase was so perfectly corporate, so carefully neutral, that it almost made me smile. He wasn't apologizing. He was opening negotiations, as if my dignity was something he could buy back with the right offer. "I'm listening," I said, keeping my voice neutral, curious to see how far he'd go. And, oh, did he go far. He talked about consulting arrangements with generous compensation. He mentioned advisory roles that would keep me connected to Meridian without the day-to-day pressures. He even suggested that perhaps my unique institutional knowledge could be valuable during the transition period, hinting at numbers that would have sounded impressive if I didn't know exactly why he was offering them. This wasn't generosity. This was panic disguised as partnership. He needed me to undo what I'd done, to tell the board it was all a misunderstanding, to make his problem disappear, and he thought money would do it. "Marcus, let me ask you something," I interrupted, my patience for his performance wearing thin. "When you refused to shake my hand in front of 40 people, when you fired me without explanation or due process, when you humiliated me as your opening act as CEO, were you thinking about benefits for everyone then?" Silence. The kind of silence that's louder than any response. Then his voice shifted. The warmth evaporated. The mask cracked. "Look, Annabelle, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but you're putting the entire fund at risk. Limited partners are asking questions. Deals are stalling. This isn't just about you and me anymore." And there it was. The truth he'd been dancing around. It was never about making things right. It was about making me stop. "You're right," I said, my voice steady as stone. "It's not about you and me. It's about documented misconduct, procedural violations, and fiduciary responsibility, all of which were triggered by your actions, not mine. I simply exercised authority that I've always had, authority that exists specifically for situations like this." I could hear him breathing on the other end, could almost feel the rage building behind his careful corporate facade. "If you think the board is going to side with you over their CEO because of some technicality, you're delusional," he snapped. And there it was, the real Marcus Hale, the one who saw people as obstacles instead of human beings, the one who thought titles trumped truth. "It's not a technicality, Marcus. It's a compliance recording. It's a delegation document with active authority." It's documented evidence of hostile conduct that violates every leadership standard Meridian Capital claims to uphold. I paused, letting that sink in. And the board isn't going to side with anyone. They're going to protect the fund, which means they're going to eliminate the risk. And right now, you're the risk. He tried to respond, tried to regain control of the conversation with threats about legal action and consequences I'd supposedly face. But I'd heard enough. Marcus, you can call my lawyer if you want to continue this conversation. His contact information is in the notification I sent Friday night. Goodbye. I hung up before he could say another word. For a moment, I just sat there, phone in my hand, heart pounding not from fear, but from the strange exhilaration of finally speaking truth to someone who'd only ever heard compliance. He'd tried charm, then negotiation, then intimidation, the standard playbook of people who confuse authority with power. But none of it worked, because I wasn't playing his game anymore. I was playing mine, and my game had rules, documentation, and consequences he couldn't talk his way out of. Wednesday's board meeting was less than 24 hours away, and Marcus Hale had just shown me exactly who he was when the performance ended. Somewhere between his fake warmth and his real rage, he'd sealed his own fate. I'd just been there to witness it. Wednesday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. I wasn't invited to the board meeting. I was the subject of it. But my lawyer was there as an observer, present to ensure that the process remained procedural and that the evidence was reviewed fairly. He told me to stay off my phone, to avoid checking email, to just let the system do what systems do when they're properly designed. But I couldn't help myself. I sat at my Kit Parker table, coffee going cold, staring at my laptop screen like it might reveal secrets through sheer force of will. This was the moment where everything I'd set in motion would either validate my actions or brand me as someone who'd overstepped. There was no middle ground. The call came at 11:43 a.m. Annabelle, they watched the recording, my lawyer said, his voice carrying a tone I couldn't quite place, satisfaction mixed with something darker. The entire board sat there and watched Marcus refuse your handshake, heard him say that line about people who won't be there much longer, witnessed the public termination without cause or process. And then they reviewed the delegation document, confirmed your authority was never rescinded, and examined the procedural justification for freezing the capital. He paused, and in that pause, I felt the entire trajectory of the last week crystallize into a single moment. Annabelle, they're not questioning your actions. They're questioning his fitness to lead. Apparently, the meeting had shifted from investigating Annabelle Parker's overreach to assessing leadership conduct standards within the first 30 minutes. Because here's what people like Marcus never understand. Boards don't care about personalities or egos or who won the power struggle. They care about risk, liability, exposure, and reputation. And a CEO who creates a documented hostile environment in his first week, who demonstrates such poor judgment that it triggers emergency governance protocols, that's not a leadership style difference. That's a fundamental competence problem. The karma of it all, the beautiful, inevitable karma, was that Marcus had been judged by the very standards of efficiency and new culture he'd used to justify my termination. One board member, apparently, had asked the question that cut through all the noise. If we'd known this recording existed before we hired him, would we have made the same decision? The room had gone silent, because the answer was obvious. No institutional investor, no fiduciary board, no serious organization would knowingly hire someone who treated people with such casual cruelty, who demonstrated such poor impulse control, who confused dominance with leadership. The recording had done exactly what I'd known it would. It removed the possibility of spin, of alternative narratives, of he said, she said ambiguity. It was just him, his words, his choices, preserved in digital clarity for everyone to judge. By 2 p.m., the decision was made. Marcus Hale was suspended pending a full investigation into his conduct and compliance with company policies. His authority was frozen. His access to systems was restricted. His ability to make decisions on behalf of Meridian Capital was effectively nullified. It wasn't quite termination. Boards move carefully, worried about wrongful dismissal claims and legal exposure. But it was close enough. He'd gone from celebrated CEO to investigated liability in exactly 6 business days. The vengeance people might have expected me to feel wasn't there. Instead, I felt something colder, cleaner, validation. Not that I'd won some personal battle, but that the system, when properly invoked, actually worked. Jennifer sent me a message that evening. He cleaned out his office this afternoon. Security escort. The whole floor watched. Nobody said goodbye. And I realized something important in that moment. Something about justice and payback and the difference between the two. Payback is personal. It's emotional. It's about making someone hurt the way they hurt you. But justice is structural. It's about ensuring that actions have consequences, that power comes with accountability, that cruelty doesn't get rewarded just because it's delivered with confidence. Marcus hadn't been destroyed by my anger. He'd been destroyed by his own choices, documented and reviewed by people whose job was to protect the institution. I'd just been the one who knew which buttons to push. And sometimes, that's all justice needs. Someone who understands how the machinery works and isn't afraid to use it. The formal announcement came 3 days later, buried in corporate language designed to minimize scandal while acknowledging reality. Meridian Capital announces leadership transition effective immediately. Marcus Hale has departed to pursue other opportunities. The board of directors thanks him for his brief service and wishes him well in his future endeavors. Brief service. The euphemism was almost poetic. 6 days of employment reduced to 2 words that said everything and nothing at once. There was no press conference, no farewell email to staff, no carefully crafted narrative about mutual decisions or strategic differences. Just silence, absence, and the kind of efficient removal Marcus himself had championed. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. What struck me most wasn't that he was gone. I'd known that outcome was inevitable from the moment I sent that notification. But how quietly it happened. No drama, no public spectacle, no hand extended that he could refuse. Just procedural execution. The same cold efficiency he'd used to dismiss me, now applied to him with surgical precision. The board had voted, the decision was logged, and Marcus Hale simply ceased to exist in the Meridian Capital ecosystem. His nameplate removed from the office, his access credentials deactivated, his vision for new culture erased like it had never been spoken. In corporate terms, he'd been ghosted by an entire institution. I heard through my network that he'd tried to control the narrative afterward, reaching out to industry contacts with his version of events, something about irreconcilable differences with legacy stakeholders, and resistance to necessary change. But whispers travel fast in private equity, and the truth, or at least a version close enough to it, had already made the rounds. People knew about the recording. They knew about the public humiliation. They knew that a CEO had lasted less than a week before triggering governance protocols serious enough to end his tenure. In an industry built on trust and reputation, that kind of story doesn't fade. It follows you. Marcus would find other opportunities eventually, but the stain of this failure would be there, underneath whatever polish he tried to apply. The strangest part was how little satisfaction I felt watching it all unfold. I'd imagined this moment dozens of times during those first angry nights after my termination, pictured his downfall, his humiliation, his comeuppance. But now that it had actually happened, the emotion I felt wasn't triumph or glee or revenge fulfilled. It was something quieter, more complex. Relief, maybe. Validation that I hadn't been crazy to believe my worth wasn't defined by someone else's cruelty. Confirmation that systems, when properly designed and properly invoked, can hold even powerful people accountable. But also emptiness. The strange deflation that comes when you've spent all your energy building toward a moment, and then the moment passes, and you're left wondering what comes next. Because here's the truth, nobody tells you about justice. It doesn't heal the wound. It doesn't erase the memory of standing in that conference room with my hand extended while 40 people watched him refuse it. It doesn't undo the shame, the shock, the gut punch feeling of being humiliated in front of colleagues I'd worked with for over a decade. Justice confirms that what happened was wrong, that consequences matter, that actions have weight, but it doesn't make you whole again. That work, the work of rebuilding self-worth and dignity after someone tries to strip them away, That's something you have to do yourself. Separate from whatever happens to the person who hurt you. So when the official announcement went out, when my phone buzzed with messages from former colleagues saying, "You did it," and "He got what he deserved," I didn't celebrate. I didn't post anything cryptic on social media. I didn't even call my lawyer to debrief. I just sat quietly in my apartment, Pepper curled up beside me, and acknowledged that a chapter had closed. Marcus Hale was gone. The freeze on Capital had been lifted pending new leadership. Meridian Capital would survive, restructure, and move forward like institutions always do. And me? I was still here, still standing, still the person who understood how power actually worked. The question now wasn't whether I'd won. It was what I'd do with the fact that I had. And that answer was still being written. The call came on a Friday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks after Marcus's departure. It was David Richardson, the board chairman, a man I'd met maybe 3 times in my entire tenure at Meridian, always in passing, always with the polite distance that separates institutional leadership from operational staff. His voice was warm, respectful, carrying none of the corporate coldness I'd grown accustomed to. "Annabelle, I want to start by apologizing on behalf of the board for what you experienced. What happened in that conference room should never have occurred, and we take full responsibility for not vetting leadership more thoroughly. It was a real apology, not the sanitized corporate version, and it caught me off guard. We'd like to discuss your return to Meridian Capital," he continued, and I felt my stomach tighten. "Not in your previous role, but in a significantly expanded capacity. Chief Operating Officer, with a seat on the executive committee, full partnership track, and compensation reflecting the institutional knowledge and judgment you've demonstrated." He paused, letting the offer land. "Annabelle, you showed more leadership in 1 week than most people demonstrate in their entire careers. We want you back. We need you back. And we're prepared to make it worth your while." The numbers he mentioned were staggering. Nearly triple my previous salary, equity participation, full authority over operations and systems. It was everything I might have wanted 2 weeks ago. But here's what David Richardson didn't understand. What the board didn't understand. What maybe even I hadn't fully understood until that moment. Bringing me back would transform what had happened from consequence into negotiation. It would turn Marcus's removal from justice into a transaction. You fire the woman publicly, she pulls the emergency brake, you fire the CEO, and then you rehire the woman with a promotion to make it all go away. That's not accountability. That's just expensive cleanup. And the message it would send, to me, to everyone watching, to the industry, was that dignity and self-worth were negotiable. That humiliation could be compensated for with the right title and the right number on a contract. I thanked David for the offer. I told him I appreciated the apology and the recognition. And then I said no. Not because I didn't need the money or because I had some better opportunity lined up. I didn't. I said no because accepting would have undermined everything I'd just proven. That my value wasn't conditional on their approval. That my authority didn't require their validation. That the power I'd exercised wasn't something they'd given me and therefore couldn't take away. Reclaiming your worth isn't about getting the people who wronged you to finally see your value. It's about knowing your value regardless of whether they ever do. I understand this might seem like pride, I told David, my voice steady and certain. But it's not. It's principle. What happened in that conference room revealed something fundamental about how Meridian operates. Not just under Marcus, but systemically. The fact that 40 people watched him humiliate me and said nothing. The fact that HR had termination papers ready before I even walked in. The fact that this could happen at all tells me the culture issues run deeper than one bad CEO. And I'm not interested in being the symbol of how you fixed it. I'm interested in building something where it wouldn't happen in the first place. There was a long silence on the other end. Then David said something I didn't expect. "You're absolutely right. And we have a lot of work to do." We ended the call cordially, professionally, with mutual respect that felt more genuine than any corporate relationship I'd had at Meridian. And as I hung up, I realized something important. The real victory wasn't Marcus losing his job, or the board recognizing my value, or even the vindication of being proven right. The real victory was this moment. The moment where I chose my dignity over their offer. Where I walked away from what looked like winning, because I understood that real power doesn't need external validation. Marcus had tried to make me feel worthless. The board tried to make me feel valuable, but neither of them got to decide. That was always mine, and I was keeping it. So here's my question for you. When was the last time someone underestimated you, and what did you do about it? Did you fight back with noise, or did you move in silence? Because I need to know. I need to hear your stories. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to make you feel small? Tried to strip away your dignity in front of others? Tried to convince you that your worth was tied to their approval? And if you have, what happened next? Did you walk away quietly? Or did you find your own version of that authority clause, that documentation, that moment where you proved they'd miscalculated everything? Drop your story in the comments below. Tell me about the boss who underestimated you, the family member who dismissed you, the colleague who backstabbed you when you needed support most. Tell me what you did, or what you wish you'd done. Because here's what I've learned. We're all carrying these moments, these experiences of betrayal and humiliation, and sometimes just naming them, just putting them into words where other people can see them, is the first step toward reclaiming what was taken. Your story matters. Your experience matters. And I want to hear it. And here's the deeper question, the one that kept me up at night even after everything settled. Was I right to walk away from that offer? Should I have taken the promotion, the money, the validation, and used it to change things from the inside? Or was refusing the only way to prove that my worth wasn't negotiable, that justice isn't something you accept as payment for humiliation? I genuinely want to know what you think. Would you have taken the deal, or would you have walked away like I did? Because I'm still processing it myself, still wondering if there's a right answer when it comes to dignity versus opportunity. Comment below with your thoughts, your stories, your own moments of choosing between consequence and compromise. Have you ever had to decide between accepting an apology with compensation or walking away to preserve your integrity? Have you ever frozen someone's world the way I froze that capital? Or do you wish you had? What does revenge mean to you? Is it about making someone pay? Or is it about proving they never had the power they thought they did? I'm reading every single comment, and I want this to be a conversation, not just a story I told and walked away from. And if this resonated with you, if you felt something shift while listening to this, if you recognized yourself in any part of what I went through, then do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because this isn't the only story like this I have to share. There are more layers to pay back, more truths about family betrayal and corporate warfare and the way systems protect power until someone knows how to make them do the opposite. I'm going to keep bringing you these insights, these provocative truths, these stories that make you question everything you thought you knew about who really holds authority in relationships, in companies, in life. So subscribe, stay connected, keep challenging the narratives that tell you to be quiet, to accept less, to let humiliation slide because fighting back is unprofessional. Because what I've learned, what I want you to learn, is that real power doesn't perform. It doesn't need applause or validation or approval. Real power exists in structure, in knowing which buttons to push, in understanding that consequence isn't something you threaten, it's something you execute. And the people who understand that, they're the ones who change everything. Be one of those people. I'll see you in the next one.